Greetings, everyone. My name is Hitendra Wadhwa. I'm a professor of practice here at Columbia Business School. Warm welcome to our panel on virtual leadership and the future of leadership development. I want to take a moment just to start by giving us a couple of basics to make this a beautiful and smooth experience for all of us. So a recording of this event will be made available as a playback in case you're interested in revisiting the content later. I'm also encouraging you to tweet, if you like, using the hashtag that you see here, Columbia ExecEd. And if you have questions along the way, throughout the webinar, use the Q&A box below. We are going to be collecting these questions through the event for a Q&A session. And so we'd love to actually involve you all through the way. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So I want to start just by giving you a little bit of background as to why we are here today. We know that all of us have been thrown so out of our comfort zone with the way in which the landscape of the workplace has shifted so dramatically in the last year or so, right? And so some of us are really grappling with issues of connection, across people, co-creation and creativity in a physically distanced and socially distanced world, issues about trust in the workplace and in relationships, our office culture, how do we really foster and promote that, the work-life balance when work and life are starting to get dissolved into each other, the virtual fatigue, that more and more we are hearing is setting in for people as they're sitting in front of the screens interminably long. But on the other hand, there are also, all kinds of news about the level of productivity gains that organizations are facing in this environment and the flexibility that employees are sometimes really appreciating about the kind of environment that we're in, right? And so where do you land on this? Where do you land on this, right? And if you look at the leadership view more broadly, this is, part of research. My colleague Raghu, who's the former CHRO of GE and now doing his PhD in the future of work, that he has put together, which is that there is a very diverse set of points of view out there as to the nature of virtual work, right? And so you have everyone from Reed Hastings at Netflix, who's actually quite critical. He's not really seeing much hope and possibility in this. And then you have, Tim Cook at Apple, who's kind of mixed in his views. It's not like being together physically, but I do think that there are some, real advantages here. And then you have, as you can see on the right, the point of view from Hayward, at Rite Aid, which is like, this is awesome. We've actually really adapted to it and we're actually seeing some really great things emerge from it as well, right? And so what we'd like to do is unpack this a little bit, right? With our three very distinguished panelists and also to get the opportunity to hear your voices along the way. And so I'm just going to lay out like three broad themes that we're going to use as a way to structure and organize our conversation today. And then I'm going to take about a 30-minute time frame to have this conversation with our panelists, open it up to then your questions for the last about 15 minutes of this 45-minute session. So the three broad themes. The first I would just going to propose is that whenever I find that there is any kind of change or disruption that is happening, the first thing we may want to do is, rather than get swept up in it, to get to our very core and to reaffirm our core. What is our reason for being? What is our mission? What is our purpose? What are our values? Because those don't need to change. It is the outer expression of those that gets to evolve and change and be adapted as conditions around us evolve, right? And so reaffirm your core. And you'll see that I will talk to the panelists about this idea of how are we in the present times really seeking to preserve and nurture our values. The second is this theme of, if change is happening, rather than seek to just like protect and preserve the practices of the past, right? Maybe I should like lean into it. And maybe I should ask myself, well, what are things that we can do now that we couldn't do earlier so that we can take advantage, of the blank slate, the blank canvas that we are being offered today to rethink and reform our practices in a way that we don't have to be stuck in the grooves of the past. And then the third is that in a time like this, all of us, including the experts, including the people in positions of power and authority, like the leaders that we have in our panel today. We all have to become learners. We all have to experiment. We all have to question. We all have to share and connect and gain knowledge, and ultimately, in an iterative way, make our way towards success. So on these three themes of affirming the core and the values, moving into this transformation mindset, and then also being learners, let me introduce our panelists, of the day. And so, Pooja, I welcome you in. Thank you for joining us. If you could, come by on video and just say hello.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Hitendra, and thank you to Columbia Business School for this amazing opportunity to participate in this panel. Thank you to the viewers as well. My name is Pooja Nayar. I'm the Senior Director of Talent and Organizational Development at the New York Power Authority. I'm really excited to be here. I started my career in Toronto in management consulting. My background's in organizational psychology. About a few years into that, I then moved into the broader world of org development and have been working in the energy industry for about 15 years now, both first in Canada and now here at the New York Power Authority. Been with NYPA for almost 4 years now, and my current portfolio is around strategic workforce planning, performance management, leadership, learning development, and knowledge management. So excited for this conversation today. And I'll turn it over to Eileen.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Eileen Deedy, and I am the Senior Head of Human Resources at Operative. We are an ad tech company, and I oversee all of North America and Brazil, on the global HR scale. And I also oversee the global development pillar for Operative. So it's my job specifically to make sure that we are building out performance management training programs, as well as learning and development programs, not just within my remits, but on a much larger global scale. So I'm very excited to be here as well, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And Monica, let's welcome you in as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone. My name is Monica Yavin, and I'm the Head of Learning and Development and Senior HR Business Partner at First Eagle Investment Management. Been here for about 4 years. First Eagle is a boutique investment management company with a little over 400 employees. It dates back to 1864. Prior to joining First Eagle, I held various leadership roles within learning and development and performance management at AIG and Citi. I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation today.
Well, big welcome to all three of you. Thank you for making this moment happen. And let's move right into my questions for you, since time is short and precious. So Pooja, I'm going to maybe actually, I'm sorry. Let me start by posing a question to you, Monica.
Okay.
And this relates to that first of the themes that I was talking about, which is at a time like this when there's so much change going on, how do we, also preserve our values? How do we connect to certain practices that we think are really at the very core of what makes our organization thrive and succeed? There was an example that we were discussing around performance management, in which you have in your organization really spearheaded some really important initiatives. Could we talk about that?
Yeah, of course. So at First Eagle, we've had a set of core values in place for many years. We call them our guiding principles, and they explain our belief, our purpose, our mission of preserving our clients' capital during downside events and other more broad things. But what we needed to really build upon were the set of performance behaviors that we believe were important for success. We had left it to each department to define success metrics by role, which was generally okay. But it created some unintended silos and really no common language to use when talking about performance. When we were all forced into a remote working situation, it became clear we needed a common language to address how we evaluate performance, especially during a really challenging time. Because the environment was already complex and uncertain, the goal was to keep the proposal simple and relevant. We're a small company, so for us, this was achievable at First Eagle. I'm not suggesting it might be achievable for everyone. For every company. For us, the first step was to transition from department level behaviors or competencies to a set of firm-wide behaviors to ground us. But I really needed some inspiration on what those should be. And I couldn't pop into people's offices like I would have done before to brainstorm ideas. I wound up finding my inspiration from these bi-monthly calls that they're called all hands calls that we started to provide employees with real-time information about COVID, other business updates and other events that were taking place. During these calls, I kind of picked up on some themes that our CEO would consistently hit on. The one was, he was telling our employees, it's really important to stay focused. This is a very challenging time. Important to put points on the board, as he called it. He said it's important to stay connected, communicate, collaborate, and it's essential to be adaptable. So after a couple of months of working remotely and listening to these calls where I was hearing these same themes repeated, I proposed that for our year-end performance process, we focus on 3 areas for employees: their impact, their behaviors, and their growth. So for impact, employees would note how they put points on the board, and I use that phrase because I heard him say it over and over, or their most notable achievements. And this replaced a kind of a complex goal-setting process, and it was retroactive. So it wasn't something we had done earlier in the year. This was just at the end of the year, they would have to reflect on the year that was. The behaviors would evaluate how employees were adaptable, collaborative, and results-oriented, and which were consistent for all employees. And growth would just identify how they would commit to improve their performance in 2021. Now, this didn't mean that businesses no longer had specific activity metrics or sales goals. Those elements were factored into their impact and how they were results-oriented. And the common set of behaviors, firm-wide behaviors, gave us a common language to talk about performance that was relevant and simple. It also helped to reduce those silos during a time when that could have easily happened when we were working all virtually and remotely. So.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you. So a core ethic of performance management adapted for today's challenging times. Very nice. Any comments from Eileen or Pooja?
I think just the whole idea of values and what you said there, Monica, really resonates in terms of the how this shows up, right? At NYPA, we just launched our Vision 2030, our new strategic vision, and we refreshed our values. We now have our core values that are, it's really about how do these show up? What does this look like? And really, how is these exemplified within the organization? So that really resonates when you talk about that.
And I think
go ahead, Eileen.
I was just going to say, I think from my company's perspective, again, we're in this growth stage where we're now focusing on things like building our values and our mission statements. And so the interesting piece of this is trying to determine that as you're setting these expectations for the organization. And so it's this, collaboration, this combined initiative that you're trying to work through when you don't already have these very structured values in place already.
Yeah, so let's talk on the theme of collaboration next. It has been such a core, of any high performing culture. This needs to have people, have spontaneous combustion happen, like cross fertilization of ideas, sparks, that fly in the room as one builds on the other and what have you. And yet here we are, thrown into the wilderness, each in our own homes. How do you do that? How do you preserve that aspect of what has made the workplace so, in some ways, sacrosanct, for performance, which is bringing people together, having knowledge sharing, idea sharing, sparks fly. Pooja, maybe you can start us off on that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's definitely a challenge, like knowledge sharing, capturing knowledge, transferring it is an issue no matter what, let alone in a virtual environment now, right? I think one way that we're really working to drive this is in building this peer-to-peer sharing, knowledge sharing culture. And in doing that, really very intentionally trying to embed this into the program design of what we put out there. So one example that I think worked really well for us is we created during the pandemic, a manager development program. And the idea here was kind of a continuing education for people managers. We accelerated this as a result of the pandemic, recognizing that, there was a lot more support that people managers needed. And there's often this idea of, you bring in the experts, right? But what we really started to realize was there is so much wisdom already within the organization. And for us, there are people in the organization who have this reputation for being really strong at developing people or creating these innovative environments. So what we did was create these panels, a series of panels, where we brought in experts from across the organization, internal experts, diverse panels. So you're talking about, different levels of leadership across regions, across business units. And what we found through that was it was really impactful because you were hearing from peers who are in the trenches with you, right? These are people that are relatable. A lot of what they're sharing is tips and tools and tricks that you've seen these tried and tested, right? You know they'll work in your culture. So that was a huge benefit of that. The other sort of kind of amazing benefit through this was the fact that now you almost had this recognition built in, right? So by being on this panel, it was this opportunity for professional development for these folks as well, because you were able to get to acknowledge and give them that kudos on their sharing and their thought leadership. The simplicity of this was kind of the beauty of it. You know, it was all very intentionally done and a lot of thought went into creating this, but it was really just leveraging that internal talent for that social learning platform.
It's great, turning a constraint into an opportunity. Cool. Any follow-up thoughts on this one from you, Eileen and Monica?
I mean, just a couple. One thing. I mean, I think the thought that collaboration can only happen in person is we've dispelled that. I think that that's no longer the case. You know, I think since working virtually, if I had a problem to solve or a group to get together for any particular reason, it was actually quite easier to just, you know, schedule a Zoom call. Whereas in the pre-COVID world, I had to make sure, was that person traveling that day, or were they going to be around, and what, can I get a conference room? And, you know, was there space available? And all that went away, and the barrier to entry to really get people together was quite easy. And I didn't have to worry about, were they in the office yet? Is it too early to schedule the meeting or too late? I mean, maybe that's kind of infringing on some boundaries, but you know, it really did feel like the collaboration, or the ability to collaborate, wasn't really impeded as much as I think people think, because just the ease at which we can access people now is there. And so I think collaboration is actually improved in some ways, in my view.
Yeah, very cool. One insight that I've gained in recent times through some of the science on communication is that apparently the most critical variable is less like seeing the other person, and it's more hearing the other person. Because people can, in their facial expressions at times, do a better job of like acting out a certain persona, even while they might be thinking or feeling something else from inside. But the voice actually betrays pretty much what it is that you're thinking or feeling from inside. So there's been this encouragement from the scientific community that if you really truly want to bridge those distances, which, you know, we have been thrown into in the, you know, in this post, you know, in this pandemic world, then pay attention to the other person's voice and make sure that in the manner in which you create that ecosystem virtually, that people have good sound. So cool. So let's move on then to another theme here, which is, you know, I mean, you know, as you mentioned, you know, this is a hyper growth phase for your organization. It's a very entrepreneurial, you know, environment for you to be part of. And in a moment like that, there is a little bit of that blank canvas like opportunity, you know. And so can you talk a little bit, you know, when you take like very like established practices, like building out like a leadership process, et cetera, like how in your case are you leaning into this moment where you're seeking to do it, you know, without a huge amount of legacy?
Right. So let me just first mention that I've been with the company for 11 months now. So that actually even makes it more interesting, gives me a different perspective because of where I've come from in the past and being in a very structured environment. I'm now in this organization, to your point, that actually has a blank slate. So I think what has been most valuable is really understanding the workforce and getting under the hood, if you will, just in terms of what type of trainings that you need to actually build out. And blank canvas gives you the opportunity to do that. Because we are a global company, we do have a little bit more flexibility in the fact that people have been working virtually with their colleagues for a long period of time. But I think a lot of it comes down to being creative and what actually is going to make the biggest impact for an organization that is entrepreneurial, that is growing fast, and is also you know, comprised of different acquisitions as well. So you're trying to build the culture at the same time. So it makes for a very interesting experience, and you know, you do have to really understand your organization well to make it as effective as possible.
You know, with the time that you spent in the industry, you know, in the space of HR, you know, I'm just curious to ask, I mean, are there any like if you want to call it like sacred cows of the past, any kind of, ways in which we have practiced, leadership or leadership development in the past, where you look at it today and you say, since I'm getting this fresh opportunity, I want to question that, or I want to ideate and do something with a little bit more of a freshness of the 21st century in it, rather than the legacy of the 20th century in it.
Yeah, and I think part of that falls on me to make sure that I'm always abreast of what type of creative initiatives that I can bring, because certainly in years past, when you could pull people together in a conference room and collaborate to that extent, it certainly allowed you for a lot more creative flow, I think. And so trying to leverage the direction that we are headed, both from an HR perspective and an organizational angle, it's really just been a matter of saying, what do I think is going to be most effective? I'm still building out those thoughts. I'm not going to sit here and say I have all of the answers, but so it is, a learning opportunity for me as well.
So I'm hearing you say then that there is almost like an experimental sort of path that you're taking to have ideas and thoughts, but to really try them out and then learn iteratively. Yeah, is that a fair way of saying it?
Yes, and I think when you open the communication to the individuals who've been with the organization to hear their perspective and then work with your teams, it really helps you start to put a thought together, so that it's not just taking what you know from a legacy perspective and applying it because you want it to be effective, but you don't have it all figured out first go around. It will actually be an evolvement, and I personally think that's very exciting.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to, in just a few seconds, come back to all three of you with, with your thoughts on how the digital evolution of business you think is going to really impact, what you do. So let's come back to that in just a few seconds. Before we do that, let me invite our attendees to contribute as well. And so, across all of you, I have no doubt that there are some really interesting experiences that are unfolding in the present time, and some ideas and insights that you have collected as well. So why don't we do a little bit of that crowdsourcing and sharing as well? So can you use chat to share a principle, an idea, an insight, that you think is really, really working for you, that you would like to offer to us? Or, in brief, short story, a particular tactic, an approach, or a moment, where you learn something that you'd like to use this as an opportunity to disseminate amongst all of us, so we can all benefit from what it is that you've gone through. All right. So again, I have no doubt that there is much genius, across all of us collectively. Let's use chat, and make sure when you do that, that you go for the option which is all panelists and attendees. And that way you'll be able to share across our whole audience as well. All right. And so with that question that I'm now shared with you all in the attendees, here, let me turn it over to this digital future, right? And so when you think about human resources, and in particular learning and development, right? What do we think is like some really critical things that you're thinking about in advancing and adapting your organization to that? Maybe Pooja, you could start, with that.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so top of mind, right? And it's almost funny because we talk about this digital future, but in many ways, we're already in this digital future, right? The last year has really shown us that. I think one of the big kind of challenges that we're going to find is sort of what you were saying earlier, Hitendra, like those opportunities to have that organic connection happen, right? Everything is a little bit more scheduled, a little bit less spontaneous than it used to be. So how do you help to create that feeling of connectedness, which is so much bigger? Like it links to psychological safety. It links to that feeling of being part of something bigger, and really helps in terms of building that resilience, which is what we really need when we look at how we create this digital future. So I think our role as HR L&D professionals is in how do we intentionally start to create some of those opportunities for connectedness, right? And there's no one answer to that. I think the key to me is how do you build this into the different programs, the different initiatives that you create. So whether this is around, something we did pre-pandemic but are still doing has become more important now virtually, is having when a new hire starts, they get an onboarding buddy. So there's someone who kind of helps them navigate the culture, helps them learn the things that are not there in a policy or a procedure, right? You create these cohorts, as you were talking about, Monica, for new hires. You have this shared experience that you're all going through together. We also found virtual learning, which we shifted to very quickly once the pandemic began, where previously all of our learning was very much in person, you know, at different sites across the state. We now had broken all geographical barriers because everyone, didn't matter where you were from, where you were situated, you could be in this virtual classroom. And inadvertently ended up breaking a lot of these silos that automatically start because of these kind of regional requirements. So that has been huge. We've also tried to leverage kind of peer mentors. So really about building those opportunities into the way you create your programming so that you can have people have these meaningful connections. And it's not just about the connectivity of, you know, my phone is with me 24/7, but really having those personal relationships that you can drive.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that there's some good insights there about human behavior that really need to be brought in to understand what that really, you know, is about in a more digital world. I'm seeing some comments here as well from some of us. There's a question from you, Moin, around you know, the lack of personal touch and how do you overcome that in this digital world. And then comment here from you, Robert, about you know, this is a time that we really need to exercise more patience and more empathy and engage in a more human level with colleagues and leadership. And what does that look like and how do we really activate it? So thank you for speaking to some of those themes as well, Pooja. Yeah, what do you think, Eileen? Any thoughts on the digital, you know, future?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I would say that the challenge is always making sure that people are asking the right questions to, we'll say, for managers to engage with their employees specifically. It becomes more of a conscious mindset to have to ask people, how are they doing that check-in to make sure that they are even understanding how the individual is doing, you know, on a personal level. And also just taking that time out to say, you know, what sort of roadblocks are you facing? How can I help you alleviate those? So ultimately, it all comes back to communicating and being a better communicator. And from my perspective on an HR level, that's the message that I have to keep reinforcing, because that does actually create that connectivity that needs to happen in a digital world.
Yeah, yeah. Hannah has a comment very much building on what you're saying, Eileen. You know, how are you doing, right? And so she's talking about the idea of like open questions, you know, just getting to check in with people in a way that, you know, creates the space, right, for safe sharing. I assume, Hannah, is part of what you're saying. And I want to encourage us there in the spirit of the science that I just shared to not just pay attention to the words that the person is responding with, but just like, how are you sensing them today? You know, what might be going on, which maybe they find it awkward to share with you, but that maybe is, you know, maybe indicative that there is a larger environment in which they are right now, perhaps like struggling with something or not. And so just checking in a little bit with that as well. So thank you for that. Monica, any thoughts on the digital future?
Yeah, I mean, I can share an example of what happened in my company. That in, I guess it was late February, we closed on an acquisition. And, you know, we were super excited to spend the entire year integrating these employees and meeting with them. They were based in Chicago and Boston for the most part. You know, obviously late February, we closed on the acquisition. And then in March, we're thrust into this remote working environment where all those plans were out the window. So, you know, we had to really adjust, and we did the best we could. And we had to update employment agreements. We had to convert benefits. We had to do all these things that were actually no issue to do virtually. The issues that we had, or the challenges, were more on the cultural elements. We did the best we could with Zoom calls, Zoom happy hours, all hands calls, virtual learning programs. But, you know, it would have been really nice to see people in person. But one of the programs that really did help us connect, and a theme that we actually really enforced and focused on last year, was inclusion. And we rolled out a conscious inclusion program to over 150 people in our organization. And we did it in these, it was a half-day program, but we broke it up into 2 modules, 2 hours each. They went through it in cohorts. And, you know, it was highly interactive with the goal of helping employees to understand their own biases and their impact on those around them to do or not to do their best work. It put employees together from different departments and breakouts and asked them to share their different dimensions of diversity with the goal of really creating a work culture where curiosity about differences was encouraged instead of just tolerated. So that was really, and everyone from the acquired company attended this. And it was so impactful to really hear about them on a personal level, get to know them in a different way. And it really did cement a lot of the cultural gaps that we had, had experienced. And so, there are things that you can, traditionally would have been something I would have thought would never have worked to do that kind of training in person, in a virtual environment, but it really worked out well.
Can I just add to that quickly as well? So I have done training programs in the past, which similar to that is making sure that on an international level, you are aware of different cultures. So you're engaging with people in different remits, different regions all the time, but you're not stopping to realize the differences in the communication style, setting those expectations based on what you know of the individuals that you're working with. So trying to bring awareness to that particular aspect and say, okay, this is how somebody may culturally communicate and how this is how it's different from you. And that's when managers really come to learn from the fact that, anybody comes to learn from the fact that there needs to be a wider thought process behind, your intentions and how you're communicating to your colleagues.
Yeah, beautiful. So much to process here. And so thank you for that. And I'm noticing that there's also a vibrant set of sharings going on in chat as well. Lindsay, I'm going to just ask you for your advice on this. Is it possible that in addition to access to a future recording, to a recording of this, as something that people can come back to, will the chat, you think, be available as well? I know I'm just kind of going off script here just to allow us to think about whether there's a way for people to access the great ideas that are flowing here.
Yes, we can definitely look into that, and a recording of the webinar will be shared. So if we're able to share chat, we'll certainly do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think and I've seen at least in my class, we've been able to download chat. So hopefully there might be that opportunity. And if so, then that will allow you all to do full justice, and our panelists also to do justice to all the great comments that are here, which we don't have the mental engagement right now to be able to fully focus on. But I've been enjoying seeing so many great thoughts and ideas coming from you all. One quick little thought I can offer from my side. One thing I found in these times, especially in emotionally charged environment, like in different parts of the world, as the pandemic goes through a second wave and what have you, and people are feeling a little bit beaten up right now. Of course, Brazil and India, as are being highlighted, and we know how much of a toll it's taking in there. One thing I found very helpful is, of course, to create that space for human connection, for empathy, for people to come together. But I've also found it very valuable to actually, in those moments, including in my own team, some of whom are in these geographies, is to frame the question in a certain way that draws out the inner reserves of strength and wisdom and insight and heroism that is present in each of us, even in very tough times. So, for example, a question which is about how are you doing is one way to frame it. A question which is more about, I know these are tough times. I know that many of us are struggling, and I know that within each of us are certain reserves through which you're doing amazing things right now, for your family and for yourself, and right here, being present amongst all of us. Can you each of us just talk a little bit about what's your source of strength? Where is it that you're drawing your strength from? I'd be really curious and interested in wanting to have us learn and get inspiration from each other. Asking a question that way just takes the conversation still in a direction of human connection, but also one which is implicitly affirming that there are these possibilities of resilience and creativity and connection that lie within all of us. So anyway, that's just a quick little thought from me. And now let me turn it back to our panelists around this, this one last little sort of hurrah, in terms of a piece of advice and guidance from you. What advice would you have for folks in the HR and L&D field, right, who are really trying to implement better virtual leadership practices? If you could just kind of distill it down to its essence, what is the one big learning for you so far? Let me start with jump right in, Pooja.
I was going to say, I think to me, it comes down to a couple of things. The main piece there, I think, is to really meet your organization where they're at. A lot of times we have these big ideas, but if the org isn't ready for that, you just won't get the adoption. But it's also the idea of simplicity, right, and agility. So being able to start simple, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. I'm a big fan of pilots. and that, test it out. If it doesn't work, you'll pivot, you will course correct, but really take that first step, because I think we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves as HR professionals to get it just perfect the first time, and that's not necessary to happen.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Monica?
Yeah, I'd say, don't oversaturate the organization with too many learning initiatives. Employees can only absorb so much. Attention is in short supply across workforces and the country. Make things simple for employees to digest. Find common themes that can be woven throughout all learning programs to really have things stick, and if possible. For example, last year and into this year, we've incorporated kind of 3 key themes throughout all our learning programs. One was the importance of inclusion, resilience, and your mindset. And so those were kind of themes that we had in all of our learning programs. And I think in the organizations really starting to pick up on the importance of those. And I'll lastly add this, while we transition from operating in a complete remote working environment to the next iteration, whatever that looks like, I think the focus should be less on how many days someone is or isn't in the office and more on their impact. So are they getting results? Are they demonstrating the behaviors that matter? Are they engaged, and do they want to grow in our organization? I think these things just matter more than how many days someone signs up to come into the office. Employees now want to have some degree of control over their schedules, and organizations who understand and appreciate and accommodate this reality, I think, will be more appealing for top talent. So just my take on it.
And just another perspective to that, I do think that it's very important to be selective about what you focus on, because you don't want to overwhelm, particularly in my type of environment where everybody's working 12, 13, 14-hour days. You don't want to overwhelm because you want the information to be absorbed. So you think about in that moment, what would be most impactful. It will require you to pivot sometime based on the circumstances within the organization. So that's our responsibility as HR professionals to follow that direction and provide that training that would be most impactful in that particular moment. And we've also done employee engagement surveys based on working remotely, based on the circumstances, across the world now, and ask people how they're doing. And so based on that feedback, you can also create an action plan around that. Do they want to see more, how to work from home, how to have a better work-life balance, et cetera. So I think it's, again, just making sure that you know what your employees are thinking by asking them the questions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for those closing thoughts on the more kind of like formal part of our conversation. And I want to open it up for more Q&A as well. Just ideas from our audience. And so folks, feel free to use the Q&A window and or chat to share questions or thoughts on your mind. I want to also be playful for a moment. So Hedda, you said something really cool. You said, using metaphors is really helpful. Asking people like, what animal describes how you feel today? Describing why I feel like a lion or a badger can sometimes help start a conversation about well-being. And I want to add something to that. It can also be a great way to, sometimes get people to just have some fun around. I've done this a few times. I just ask people, okay, if you could be an animal, which animal would you be? So just think about it. And then I say, okay, now unmute yourself and make the sound of that animal all together. It's a lot of fun. All right, folks. Questions and comments. And so here's one for us, right? And so I'm getting this question from Moeen. I think I mentioned about this lack of like personal touch, and what tools are you using sometimes, especially with the less engaged members of your team. So if you've got some people in your team who typically have been sort of more distracted and less engaged, are there ways in which you have, even in this virtual world, been able to more actively bring them into the conversation?
We actually had Office 365 launch pretty much as soon as the pandemic began, and within that, Teams is kind of one of the tools that we've as an organization really adopted. I find that was something, just if we're talking actual tools, like just even picking up the phone, the equivalent to picking up the phone, having like a Teams call with someone. And I try to do that now and then, if I have a quick question, instead of doing a chat, which is kind of the standard way that we're doing it, actually have that face-to-face conversation. And I think that goes a long way. It's nice to just have the opportunity to see someone and, you know, as you said, build a bit of that personal connection. So doing that has helped. I think also we've been leveraging some of our other social media, sort of internal social media tools. We're actually going to be starting to pilot using Yammer more for kind of communities of practice, and again, building some of those opportunities for people to come together with specific interests. So a lot of technology, I think, that can be leveraged right now to help with that.
Or just point about Yammer, we actually just did an initiative which we called March Around the World, and that engaged all of our employees to do something active and then post pictures of themselves doing it. So it created this amazing story where you got to know your colleagues on a personal level, what they like to do to take the time off and decompress. So you do leverage, you learn how to leverage the software that's out there that can help make you feel connected. And at the same time, on a global scale, you're learning so much about people's environments and more about colleagues you may not interact with on an everyday basis.
We actually, we did a lot of Zoom happy hours but it weren't just us getting on a Zoom and just, you know, with our wine. It was a little more prescriptive. Someone would take the lead and come up with an activity where they would ask various questions in terms of just thought-provoking questions. One theme was, how can we be more kind to others, acts of kindness, and everyone kind of was given that heads up and had a week to think about how in their day-to-day they could demonstrate an act of kindness. There was another one where we asked a series of questions about how COVID's impacted you. What have you learned through this process? And so people went around and provided their own experiences to those questions. And then there was one where we had, I forget the name of it, but it's like on an app where it's like trivia questions, you know, and like we log into that. And so it was a little competitive. So we had different themes where you kind of brought people together around 5:30 for 45 minutes to engage in something like that. And it really connected us. And this is, keep in mind, like 6-7 months ago when we were in the, you know, really things were pretty bad. And so yeah, it was a little lightheartedness during a time when, you know, you couldn't get out much. So it's fun.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm hearing a nice thought from Lavanda as well. She's talking about a method they use of putting people into Zoom rooms and 3 people in a room, and having one simple question for each person to answer. So just simple structures through which to just like foster that kind of sharing connection. Monica, there's a question, for you around your conversation about inclusion, which is, how have you sort of like zoomed in on just the right specific topics that are the most important ones, for the organization to focus on? How have you kind of been able to kind of dive in and kind of identify, what the right themes are to focus on and filter out the others?
Yeah, I mean, this was really part of, we offered unconscious bias training in the past, and I think that was a great foundation. This year, or it was actually into last year, into this year, we partnered with Korn Ferry to deliver that conscious inclusion program. And it really took it to the next level. It really was, as opposed to just, I'm biased, so I understand that, I'm going to try not to be, or I'm going to, self-regulate in certain ways. It took it to the next level where we were really encouraging our employees to not just tolerate people that are different, but to explore and to want to understand and connect with them, and create a work environment where people felt like it was normal and comfortable and to talk about their family lives, their sexual orientation, whatever the topic. It wasn't something that we as an organization were going to try to stifle. We wanted everyone to come and show up and be their whole selves at work. And this was really our way of helping give the skills necessary to have those conversations, and to really know that as an organization, you have safety to do this. But not to also make people uncomfortable where they didn't want to. So if you didn't want to, okay, but you know what, don't make it uncomfortable for someone else who does want to. So just, try to shifting that mindset to some extent. I won't say we've cracked it and we have it all figured out. I think we're at the beginning of the journey, and we are really getting started. It's just one of the many initiatives that we have underway from building out our inclusive culture.
It's a fascinating time we live in. Digital, social, health, business, just so many boundaries being busted here with new practices. So thank you for sharing that. Robin had a question about the name of the company. I think it was Korn Ferry that you mentioned that you were using.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Korn Ferry for the training. So folks, we're getting close to closure at this point. There were a set of other questions as well we couldn't get to. my regrets. But on the other hand, I think there's been so much that we have learned through this time with the three of you, and with the sharing that you all have done in the chat window as well, for which I'm really, really grateful. So yeah, Monica, Pooja, Eileen, to close it out in one sentence, how are you feeling about our imminent future in HR and L&D? How are you feeling about it? Just one sentence to close it out from each of you. Let's start with you, Monica.
I'm feeling hopeful, optimistic, and very excited.
Perfect. Thank you. Pooja.
I'd say the same, excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there and a lot that we can drive, and HR will play a pretty significant role in that.
Perfect. Eileen.
I embrace the challenge, and I do think it's exciting as well. So there's world of opportunity out there, and I want to make sure that we're capturing that. So it'd be great.
I want to thank all three of you for bringing such richness and spirits to our conversation on such an important topic today. Thank you for making the time and sharing your insights and experiences with us. And I want to thank Columbia Exec Ed for organizing this, for us as well. And for all of you, the attendees, for being here with us today. There is going to be a survey that you will get from Exec Ed, and we'd love for you to fill it out so we can continue to learn from you about how to take this game forward and advance it as well, to bring more of these moments for us to come together in these conversations. So thank you for joining us today. Yeah, Godspeed. Take care. All right. All the best to all of you. Thank you.